Ned Stark never revealed the truth about Jon Snow's parentage to Catelyn, whom he loved, trusted deeply, and had 5 children with. Why? Why not tell her? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we dive deep into George R. R. Martin's world of ice and fire, as well as The Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, and more. Welcome. This is another collaboration with the excellent History of Westeros. Please do check out their podcast and YouTube channel. You won't be disappointed. Early in A Game of Thrones, Catelyn thinks, regarding Jon, Ned would not speak of the mother, not so much as a word. When she confronted Ned, she remembers it being the only time he ever frightened her. He told her, "Never ask me about Jon," that "here's my blood, that is all you need to know." And then he demanded to know where she had heard the name Ashara Dane. The rumours about who might be Jon's mother stopped after that. But Cat clearly didn't stop thinking about it. Years later in A Game of Thrones, there she is still thinking about it. She clearly believes what Ned has publicly said, that Jon is his bastard son with a mother he does not wish to name, perhaps Ashara Dane or perhaps someone else. Plenty of times in the chapters that follow, she thinks of her own children with Ned and Jon, and it's always clear she sees Jon with some bitterness as Ned's bastard, nothing more. When Robb argues with her about who he should name as his heir, Catelyn is bitterly against Jon as the choice, even going as far as suggesting instead some distant cousins whose names she can't even remember. If she had known Jon's true parentage then, long after Ned's death and Lyanna's and Robert's and with the country and civil war, surely then she at least would have thought about it, rather than trying to convince Robb what a terrible idea it was to legitimise his bastard half-brother. But it doesn't even cross her mind. In summary, it is beyond all reasonable doubt that Catelyn never knew the truth about Jon's parents, nor does she even suspect it. She doesn't ever connect Lyanna and Jon in her mind. Ned never told her. And this was a problem in her marriage with Ned, repeatedly causing friction between them. She tried to get Jon sent away, get him excluded from family events and so on, but Ned stood firm in insisting that Jon would be brought up within that family unit. As a result, she often took out her frustrations on Jon. She was pretty horrible to him, to be truthful, and Ned can't have been blind to it all. So why not just tell her? I think the answer at the beginning of their marriage is quite clear. He didn't know if he could trust her, because he simply didn't know her. Cat had been engaged to Ned's older brother Brandon, and only married Ned at very short notice as a matter of political expediency. The allies in Robert's rebellion needed to tie themselves together more formally, and with Brandon's death, Ned was next in line. He spent just 2 weeks with her, during which Robb was conceived, and then went off to war, only seeing her again back in Winterfell when he had returned with baby Jon and her with Robb. Telling her then would be risky. Might she tell someone else? He didn't know. The risk surely outweighed any possible benefits. Yes, she would receive the comfort of knowing her husband remained true to her, and their marriage would start off on a stronger footing, but other problems would remain. If the rest of the world still thought that Jon is Ned's bastard, as per the cover story, the shame and issues of inheritance wouldn't go away, especially if Jon himself grew up believing himself to be Ned's son. To go that far would mean telling a lot more people, and that was clearly out of the question, so not straight away. But why not when he had got to know her a bit better, and they had actually fallen in love? Why not then? He did seem to trust her. There's no indication in any of her chapters or his that they had trust issues, or that he kept any other secrets from her. In fact, they had an extremely close relationship. I suspect that some of the answer lies in Ned simply not wanting to think about that part of his life, ever. We obviously don't get a medical diagnosis here, but Ned displays a lot of symptoms of something like post-traumatic stress about all that happened. When Cat asks him about it, he gets angry and defensive and shuts down all talk about it. For years later, he gets nightmares about the events of the Tower of Joy. He has deep regrets about promises he hasn't kept. He really doesn't want to head south again to places and people that might trigger memories. He's clearly in deep pain about the things that happened, and his coping mechanism is simply to not talk or think about it, ever. He didn't tell Cat because he wanted to put the tragedies of that part of his life behind him. But perhaps also Ned saw the resentment Cat had for Jon as part of the disguise. If Catelyn knew or found out that Jon wasn't Ned's son, she might have even been kind to him after years of the opposite, and that would raise questions, especially if the change was sudden. People might have noticed if Catelyn spent years being cold to Jon, only to warm up suddenly. Furthermore, if Cat believes Ned is Jon's father, Lyanna is the last person she'd ever think of as the mother, and that's a very important point. Questions about Lyanna would very quickly lead to Rhaegar, given that their saga, whether elopement or abduction, was very public. Everyone knows he gave her the blue rose laurel and named her the Queen of Love and Beauty. In front of his own wife Elia, Robert and the Starks, Ned wouldn't have wanted to risk those questions. But let's just pause for a moment and clarify exactly what the danger is here. If Robert Baratheon discovers that Jon is the son of Rhaegar, the man he still hates with a passion, and Lyanna, the woman he believes Rhaegar stole from him, what would he do? A decade and a half after the rebellion, the subject of Targaryens remains a sore one for Robert, enough to cause him to lose his temper and worse. We all saw him order the death of Daenerys by assassin simply because she was a Targaryen and pregnant. Ned was so disgusted then that he called it cowardly to Robert's face and then resigned his position as Hand of the King on the spot. On reflection, that's a very strong reaction from Ned. More than you might expect if it were just moral care for someone he doesn't know. It's a sore spot for Ned with Robert from their past. The idea of killing innocent Targaryen children has come up before. Just after the sack of King's Landing, they publicly argued over Rhaegar's dead children, Rhaenys and Aegon. Not long after, Ned went to the Tower of Joy and found that Rhaegar had another child. If Robert was willing to kill Dany and her child, and turn a blind eye to Rhaegar's first 2 children's murders, wouldn't he have been willing to kill Rhaegar's other boy as well, even 15 years later? Maybe not, but what a chance to take. Concern for Jon's life in light of Robert's history with Targaryens appears justified. Furthermore, it's not just about the danger from Robert. Even if he turned out unwilling to kill baby Jon or even grown-up Jon, there's a risk Robert would turn a blind eye if, say, Tywin Lannister or someone of his ilk did it for him. So the risk of revealing Jon's identity was too great. It would very likely lead to his death, and very probably after that, if Ned tried to intervene, civil war. Ned would never have given up Jon to be executed, just as the man Jon Snow was named after, Jon Arryn, refused to give Ned and Robert up to King Aerys for execution at the outbreak of the rebellion. And if it came to war, it wouldn't just be Jon's life at risk, it would be Ned's entire family. Ned had seen civil war before, and it had cost him the lives of his brother, father, and sister. Never again. Not to mention others might seek to use Jon's claim through Rhaegar for their own ends. For the perfect example, we need look no further than Aegon, aka Young Griff, or Fagon, purported to be Rhaegar's son, and the way Varys and Illyrio are using him. Isn't Ned a stickler for the truth, though? Wasn't he willing to see the realm tear itself apart over Joffrey's inheritance? Why lie about Jon Snow to prevent war, but not Joffrey? Well, let's compare. From any angle, Ned is a tragic figure. Not only did he watch his sister die, he had to do the same with his best friend. He couldn't help but be reminded. He thought at the time that Robert died, that was his curse. Robert would swear undying love and forget them before evenfall, but Ned Stark kept his vows. He thought of the promises he'd made Lyanna as she lay dying, and the price he'd paid to keep them. Furthermore, when Ned kept the truth from Robert about Joffrey, Myrcella and Tommen's true parentage, he hated the lie. It tore at him and shamed him deeply. But then he didn't make a promise to someone on their deathbed. Well, technically he did. Robert did ask Ned to promise him to serve the boar that killed him at his funeral feast. The point is, he didn't make a promise about keeping Joffrey safe or keeping secret the lies about his parentage. Yet, even when making the relatively mundane promise about the boar, Ned still thought of his promise to Lyanna. In that moment, Robert also repented of his command to assassinate the pregnant Daenerys Targaryen. To Ned, it might have felt like Robert was also repenting of a murderous intent for Jon Snow as well, had Ned not kept the secret so well, a secret attached to a promise. Ned never did get the chance to serve the boar at Robert's funeral feast. He was imprisoned and executed first, so I think we can forgive him. With Lyanna, He had in half a lifetime multiple chances to break his promise, and he never did. Just as Ned never told Catelyn about Jon, Ned never told Robert the truth about Cersei and Jaime either. So even if Ned is honest to a fault, he is certainly willing to lie in extreme circumstances, such as to protect his family. He refused to acknowledge Joffrey as king until Sansa was threatened, for example. For Ned, family always seems to come first. But that quote from when Ned was at Robert's deathbed reveals an important truth, I suspect. Lying is one thing to Ned, necessary sometimes to help his family, but breaking a promise is entirely different. He thinks how keeping his promise cost him dearly. Which, of course, brings us to Lyanna's dying wish. On her deathbed, Lyanna begged him, "Promise me, Ned." It is one of the most powerful lines in all the books, in part because of the mystery surrounding exactly what that promise was, or promises were, but also because of how earnest her pleas were, and how sincere his promise was. He thinks about it all the time. 6 times the phrase, "Promise me, Ned," appears in the few chapters we have from Ned's POV as he remembers it. It seems likely the promise has something, if not everything, to do with Jon and keeping him alive. Since Jon's identity is paramount to his safety, it follows that the promise would include keeping it a secret. But ultimately, we don't have to know the exact wording of the promise to know Ned took it to heart. We need a compelling reason for Ned to deny his trusted and beloved wife Catelyn the truth. And this does rise to that level. A promise made to his sister on her deathbed that, if the secret got out, could cost the lives of his entire family. To a man of honour, and a man who loves his family more than anything, it is difficult to think of something more binding. Lord Eddard was a good man, and a stubborn one. If he promised Lyanna he wouldn't tell anyone who Jon's parents were, he would keep that promise without exception. If she said, "Promise me you'll never tell," that means no one. She probably didn't ask Ned, for example, to promise not to tell anyone except your wife, or except for those you trust the most. She likely wanted absolute assurance that Jon's identity would stay hidden, because she was dying and she wanted to know that her child would be protected. It was all that mattered to her. A new mother knowing she wouldn't be there for her child, a child in great danger given who his parents were, and knowing he's an orphan. Ned remembers how scared she had been, and how his promise to her had set that at rest. We read that, but when he gave her his word, the fear had gone out of his sister's eyes. Ned remembered the way she had smiled then, how tightly her fingers had clutched his as she gave up her hold on life, the rose petals spilling from her palm, dead and black. Why? Because she knew what Robert would do if he found out, but against that fear, she knew as well that Ned would keep his promise. She knew her brother well. Though so much remains mysterious about all of this, Lyanna, Rhaegar, Ashara, the Tower of Joy, the exact promises he made and more, we do know this. Lyanna trusted absolutely that Ned would keep his word no matter the cost to him, or his marriage, or his reputation. And she was right. The reason Ned didn't tell Cat about Jon was not because he didn't trust her, or had done a complex risk assessment about who he should tell and who he shouldn't. He didn't tell her because he had promised to tell no one. And to Ned, tragic, flawed but wonderful Ned, that meant that he would tell no one, ever. It is as simple as that. If you'd like to see more videos like this breaking down the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, there's a playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of the screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.